Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for a landmark two-day visit. Defence, energy and trade are expected to be discussed amid ongoing global tensions. Meanwhile, US Vice President J.D. Vance has confirmed that a trade agreement has been finalised between the US and India at a speech at the Jaipur Business Summit. This comes after a meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday as Vance continues his four-day visit in India. Cardinals have met in the Vatican following the death of Pope Francis on Monday, with plans being made for his funeral. The Pope's coffin will be taken to St. Peter's Basilica in an open casket for the public to pay their respect. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has called Vladimir Putin's 30-hour Easter truce a marketing operation. The comment comes after Vladimir Putin stated he was open to direct conversations with Ukraine over a potential ceasefire. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his New Zealand counterpart Christopher Luxon have met with Ukrainian troops being trained in England. Both leaders are expected to announce strengthened security and defence ties following the meeting. US President Donald Trump has backed Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth over a report of a second Yemen strike signal chat leak. Meanwhile, the White House has denied reports that it is looking to replace Hegseth amid the controversy. Harvard has sued to block US President Donald Trump from freezing over $2.2 billion in federal funding. The university had rejected a list of White House demands after Trump's administration raised concern over pro-Palestinian protests on campus. At least 12 tourists have been injured and 2 have been killed today in a terrorist attack in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, India. Security forces and medical teams have rushed to the area. The search operation is also underway. We start this hour in the Vatican. Pope Francis has died at the age of 88 after suffering a stroke and heart failure. His funeral will be held on Saturday at 10 a.m. local time in St. Peter's Square. The Vatican has released photos of his body in an open coffin. In the photos, he wore a red robe, a papal mitre and held a rosary. The coffin was placed in Casa Santa Marta and Swiss guards stood beside it. His body will be moved to St. Peter's Basilica on Wednesday at 9 a.m. local time, where people will be able to pay their respects. World leaders will attend the funeral. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa are expected to attend. According to reports, Poland will observe a national day of mourning. Meanwhile, Argentina and India have also declared mourning periods. Unfortunately, Russian President Vladimir Putin will not attend the funeral. This comes after the Kremlin cited travel restrictions due to the ICC arrest warrants against him. When a pope resigns or dies, cardinals under the age of 80 vote in a conclave to elect a new pope. The process involves secret ballots and requires a 2/3 majority. Black smoke signals no election, while white smoke indicates a new pope. The announcement follows shortly after with Habemus Papam. Cardinals have started meetings to plan the conclave. They are set to choose the next pope in May. Top contenders include Cardinals Pietro Parolin, Matteo Zuppi, Luis Antonio Tegel and Tarcisius Isao Kikuchi. The church could see a new direction depending on who is chosen. Well, joining us to discuss this complicated topic. Of course, the world in mourning following Pope Francis's death. Kennedy Karim Carlisle, Vice Chairman of the Christian Council, who joins us from Kochi in Kerala. Thank you very much for being here. I want to start, before we discuss anything else, on your thoughts around the passing of Pope Francis. What will be your memories of Pope Francis as his body is laid to rest ahead of his funeral later this week?
Well, I got actually shocked and totally disappointed when I heard that Pope Francis is no more. I got a call from one of my friends. He is a senior journalist of media. So yesterday when he called me and informed me that Pope Francis is no more, I'm totally disappointed. And even now, it's as a believer, as a follower of the Catholic Church, I'm in a bad mood. Pope Francis will be remembered forever due to many reasons. In his tenure, he has Pope Francis, he has raised up personalities like Mother Teresa, Chavra Kuriakos Elias, Eva Prasi, all those personalities to the position of a saint. And he always argued for children, women, and even for transgenders sometimes. And he was against the war. Recently, we all know that he has talked to Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and Israel President Netanyahu to end the war. And he always, very strictly sticking on with the refugees issues. And for that, even he has requested to United States and the European countries to accept the refugees and keep them with life, and to make the asylum for the refugees. And as a person, he was a pure secularist. Being a priest is not an easy thing to be a pure secularist, but Pope Francis, he was. And above all, he was a revolutionist. I would call him as a revolutionist. Do you remember that? Once he said that to get admitted into heaven, it's not mandatory to be a believer, a God believer, a theist. It's not mandatory. Yes. If you are doing good things in your life, if you are helping other people, if you are keeping close the marginalized people, if you are thinking always about the poor people, you will be, get reincarnated. You will get the heaven. You will get reincarnation. Yes. And in many ways, especially in Gaza, the war field, he has taken special initiative and asked many times.
Yes, Kennedy, I'm extremely sorry to cut you off. We are shorter on time. I do want to bring this discussion to a close by now looking forward, of course, as billions across the world celebrate Pope Francis's life and plans for his funeral step up. We also will look towards the next Pope, his successor, Pope Francis's successor. One of Pope Francis's key points was bringing in large parts of the world. We know many of the cardinals that he put in place were from different parts of the world. How important is it that this race is open and we could be looking at multiple different continents as to where the next Pope may be? We seem to have lost Kennedy, but as you can see, Kennedy, I believe, is still there with us. Kennedy, just to reiterate what I was asking there, given, of course, that Pope Francis brought in so many cardinals from across the world, how How significant is that we may see the next Pope coming from one of many continents across the world?
Yeah, all the followers of the Catholics all over the world are expecting that selection that has to be happened by the bless of the Spirit. And one more thing I wanted to, it's not fair to, if I'm not remembering that also, it's not fair to doing something to Pope Francis. I called him as a revolutionist. One more thing I remember, that he was taking initiative to go for the electric crematorium instead of the conventional type burying the dead bodies in the sand to avoid the pollution. What a revolutionary thinking he has taken. By all means, he was a revolutionist. He was a secularist. He was by all means, he was a saint, and he will be a saint in future. Unfortunately, one thing didn't happen. He was all the followers of the Catholic Church in India. We were expecting his visit to India. Unfortunately, even Pope Francis himself also wanted to come to India, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. He has gone back. It's an unfortunate thing in this moment. I'll remember that also.
Kennedy, thank you ever so much for joining us as people celebrate and remember Pope Francis. Those tributes still pouring in, and as we head towards his funeral later this week, we will of course bring you all of those updates. Moving on now, and for the first time since early 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin signalled openness to direct talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, particularly on stopping strikes on civilian infrastructure. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed Putin's remarks referred to bilateral negotiations. Meanwhile, Zelensky responded by reaffirming Ukraine's proposal for a 30-day halt on missile and drone attacks targeting civilians. The Ukrainian president also demanded a clear answer from Moscow, all while Putin acknowledged a recent strike on a civilian building in Sumy, calling it a mistake. As both sides cautiously explore the idea of limited ceasefires, Ukraine will meet with US and EU leaders in London this week to push for a broader truce. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Yulia Kazdabina, a senior fellow of Ukrainian Prism, who's joining us from Kyiv. Yulia, thank you very much for being here with us. I first would like to talk about the statement that we've seen from Vladimir Putin, talking about direct talks and looking potentially at stopping civilian strikes. What's your opinion to this statement?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I think it's the opinion is pretty clear. The fact that this is an unprovoked Russian aggression against Ukraine, it didn't change. And so what is there to talk about? Russia stopped shooting at civilian infrastructure, and Ukraine never targeted Russian civilian infrastructure. There were cases when Ukrainian drones were shot down by Russian air defenses over Russian civilian areas, and there were cases when Russian civilians died in this war, but Ukraine never deliberately targeted Russian civilian infrastructure, unlike Russia. And that case in Sumy that you mentioned, it was actually what they call a double tap attack, when first they hit a busy downtown area on a Sunday when people with families were there. And then when rescuers and also passers-by rushed to the scene to help those who suffered in the first strike, they actually sent the second missile, and the second missile had the kind of warhead on it that blew up in the air to make sure that it killed as many or hurt as many people as possible. So I mean, and Ukraine has never done anything like that. And so when Putin talks about him and Zelensky talking about stopping attacks on civilian infrastructure, he kind of implies that Ukraine does the same, but Ukraine doesn't. It's Russia who continues killing Ukrainian civilians.
Yulia, I want to bring up a comment that was made by French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, who called Putin's 30-hour Easter truce a marketing operation. Is there a fear within Ukraine that these comments of bilateral ties may be, as this has been proposed by the French Foreign Minister, a marketing ploy, as he's called it, to potentially bring Donald Trump back into the negotiating sphere after he threatened to walk away, given what he saw as a lack of progress?
I'm not sure what the purpose is for the French foreign minister to say that, but most people in the world, they woke up to the Russian war in Ukraine after the full-scale invasion, but the war has been going on since 2014. And we have been in talks with them, and we have seen ploys like that many, many times. And I think the French, who had been involved in those negotiations prior to 2022, they have also learned the Russian tactics. So I'm absolutely sure that he's just calling a spade a spade.
Yulia, as well, I want to look ahead to this meeting taking place with Ukrainian officials, European officials, and we now know US officials as well. How pivotal is this meeting in potentially putting pressure on Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire deal if these conversations that he's talking about, bilateral conversations, can't take place?
It's important to keep talking, and it's important for the US to actually see what's happening and to see that it's Russia who's refusing to stop the war. And it's also important to actually agree on security guarantees for Ukraine. And that's something that, from what I understand, is happening in those conversations. And bilateral talks, they can take place, but we've already seen this before when President Putin was claiming in 2019 that he was open to talks with President Zelensky, and those talks never happened because he kept making conditions for direct talks. So it's noise. So they can take place, but again, it's Russia's decision.
Yulia, I want to end our discussion with the fact that Russia has admitted to civilian casualties on the Ukrainian side. Is this potentially a softening in stance? And do you think that this could be the door opening slightly for a real Russian intent and Putin's real intent to end this war as soon as possible, as Donald Trump has been saying and as President Putin has been saying himself?
Well, I think it's more of a ploy to keep President Trump in the talks and to stop him from taking a decisive action against Russia, because for as long as the talks are going, we've seen what the current administration does. They refuse to condemn the Russian aggression. They even vote in the UN along with Russia and all those countries that have been considered the axis of evil, right? Those who had been considered the U.S. enemies. And so, from what I understand, for as long as the talks are going, President Trump's administration is not taking any decisive action. So, feigning some sort of a concession or some sort of a softening is a way to keep the U.S. administration in the talks and to restrain them from taking a decisive action.
Yulia Kazdabina, thank you ever so much for joining us. Of course, as those talks take place with senior officials from Europe, the US and Ukraine, we will bring you all of those updates and ahead of any potential bilateral talks between Russia and Ukraine directly. We move on now, and Iran's Foreign Minister Saeed Abbas Araghchi is set to visit China on April the 23rd at Beijing's invitation, according to an announcement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Spokesperson Guo Jiakun said the two sides will hold discussions on bilateral ties as well as key international and regional issues. Here is what the Chinese Foreign Minister had to say.
访问期间，双方将就中伊双边关系 及双方共同关心的国际地区热点问题深入交换意见。相信此访对落实两国领导人达成的重要共识，深化两国政治互信，推动两国各领域合作，共同捍卫多边主义，都具有重要意义。
Well, this visit set to take place tomorrow is just days before the third round of nuclear talks between Tehran and Washington, scheduled for Saturday in Oman. It's seen as an important step in strengthening political trust between Iran and China. Let's listen in to what the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman has said about the Iran-China ties.
روندی میتواند نقش سازنده و اثرگذاری ایفا بکنه. سفر وزیر امور خارجه به چین سفری است که از قبل برنامه‌ریزی شده بود. طبیعی است که در این سفر در مورد روند گفتگوهای غیر مستقیم ایران و آمریکا هم با مقام‌های چین رایزنی خواهیم داشت. اونها رو در جریان آخرین تحولات.
Well, Araghchi's trip to China follows his recent trip to Rome, where significant conversations took place around the Iran-US nuclear talks. Araghchi had also visited Moscow, where he emphasised that Iran maintains close consultations with its key allies, Russia and China, on nuclear matters. Well, joining us to discuss this impending meeting between Iranian and Chinese officials is Jim Rice, a professor of international law, joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, thank you as always for joining us today. What's the significance, firstly, of this meeting between China and Iran ahead of these third round of crucial nuclear talks with Iran and the US?
Thanks very much for having me on. Well, as we all know, Iran has been under crippling sanctions for years, and it's having a very devastating impact on its economy. It's isolated. It recently lost key allies in terms of Syria, and it's under great pressure. And so I think that the outreach to the PRC is a way to try and forge a better alliance with China in terms of economic ties as well as diplomatic ties. And of course, the main thing to try and get rid of the sanctions.
Yes, Jim, we're looking at the Chinese nation and the United States, which are currently locked in trade tensions, deep trade tensions. Do you think that this meeting could have any influence over the US-Iran talks that might take place, in terms of the fact that China, of course, are not just an economic superpower, but positioned directly opposite the United States at the moment? Could this be seen as a positive or maybe even a negative in the US eyes?
Well, in terms of the current tariff situation between the United States and the PRC, I'm not really sure whether that has a great deal of relevance at this time. I really see this as more of a bilateral approach between the Iranians and the PRC.
Jim, I want to look ahead to these talks that are taking place tomorrow and again look at those three nations who are clearly allied. Iran have already spoken with Russia ahead of the talks last week, and now they're meeting with China. What's the significance of these three nations being so united given the current geopolitical instability?
Well, that's an excellent question, and if I can just slightly pivot to your previous guest, Ms. Yulia, I completely agree with her points, and I believe that what Putin is doing is essentially a desperate attempt to try and stall, essentially. He knows that there's pressure from the Trump administration to come up with some peace deal. Putin has absolutely no interest in making any real peace. And so these are the kind of machinations that he's doing right now, and reaching out to the Iranians and the PRC, who, by the way, are actively involved in providing weapons to Russia. Essentially, it's a new axis of evil.
Jim, I want to look at these nuclear talks directly. Of course, Donald Trump has threatened military action if a deal isn't reached quickly. In the case of Vladimir Putin and the ceasefire negotiations with Ukraine, there's never been that rhetoric. So do you think that we could see more concrete action from the US if we get to further rounds of talks without an agreement?
Like your previous guest, who I think really nailed it and really has an insight into what Russia is, I think not. I think that there will never come a time, or it's unlikely that there will come a time, in which the Trump administration is going to put real pressure on the Russians or Putin. And the reason I say this is because, has he done so in the past? I think not.
Jim, I'd like to end this discussion looking at an Iranian perspective in these negotiations. We know what Trump wants. He's made it clear. What do you think Iran wants out of these talks with the United States?
To me, the answer to that question is very simple. They want an end to economic sanctions. They want to get back into the global economy, and they want a better economy for their own people.
Jim Rice, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing your insight there on several topics across the geopolitical sphere. That is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.